have become increasingly conservative. Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio, who is with us, is determined to help get to the bottom of this and to try to figure out a pathway forward in these areas. Recently, he founded the Dignity of Work Institute, and I am happy to welcome my friend, Senator Sherrod Brown, to tell us more about the Institute and its mission. Sherrod, welcome to the Rural Progress Summit.
Joe, thank you. And thank you for the work you're doing, that Heidi's doing. I recall a lot of stories and incidents and discussions with Joe Donnelly when we were in the Senate together. And Joe was my neighbor in the Hart office. And he was known, what stood out to me about Joe Donnelly is one of the kindest people around. And that's not always something you see among senators and the way they treat their staffs. And also, Joe, thank you. Thanks for your service there. Thanks for your service in Indiana. Thanks for your service to our country at the Vatican. And I want to come back to that a little later on Pope Leo. And Senator Heitkamp, I don't think is with us today and part of this program, but she was really instrumental in our work to restore pensions to 1 million union workers. And those workers were in all of the 50 states. Not a huge number, perhaps, in North Dakota, but a lot of them in Indiana, a lot of them in Ohio, a lot of them all over the country. And she made that fight, and we saved the pensions that essentially Wall Street had taken from these workers. So thanks for everybody on this. Joe Donnelly and Heidi Heitkamp and I have something in common. We all fought for working people in states where the National Democratic Party's reputation, as Joe essentially said in his intro, was becoming worse and worse, and eventually, for all three of us, proved impossible to overcome. We've seen the national progressive movement become increasingly disconnected from workers that we talk to every day in our three states. And it's union workers, it's even more so non-union workers, where they don't have at least union leadership talking to them sporadically or in some cases every day about what Democrats stand for and should stand for. After I lost back in November, we passed my mission. I had essentially two missions from November to January. One was to help 75 people in my office and in the committee I chaired, the Banking Housing Committee that Joe and Heidi were also on, to help them in their next steps in life. Most of them wanted to stay in public service one way or the other. And the other was to pass the Social Security Fairness Act. That was the next to the last vote I ever cast. It was after midnight in late December. And it meant that in my state alone, 250,000 workers will be getting or have gotten by now an increase in Social Security that they earned, but for a bunch of reasons weren't getting. And again, it was Democrats who fought for this. This bill it just couldn't get moving for a decade. Joe helped with us on it when he was in the Senate. Heidi helped on it. We couldn't get it across the line because we had we had very few Republican votes. Eventually, we got almost every Democrat and a handful of Republicans that passed, and it matters for workers. We've got to, when we do things like that, we got to celebrate them in real time. We've got to talk to them, to workers, to union members, to others in rural and urban America as we work on this stuff. So Joe mentioned the Dignity of Work Institute. When I left the Senate, we founded this institute. It's not going to be located in Washington. It's going to be in Ohio. It will have a reach in all 50 states. And it's the institute is really, to me, continuing a fight for workers. It's what politics and governing should be all about. The term dignity of work, it came from Dr. King, but before that, it came from Pope Leo the 13th, the last pope named Leo. And I think this pope, from not far from where Joe's from Chicago, this pope wants to continue that mission. And Pope Leo the 13th wrote something called the Rerum Novarum. It was the first time that an international figure actually spoke to workers and put workers first in the calculation of what we do as a country. So I know Joe my wife and I'm not Catholic, but my wife, I think, thinks I want to convert now that this Pope took Leo the 14th as his name. But she and I were watching the transition or whatever Catholics exactly call this when the Pope is unveiled. And when he said Leo the 14th, I just about died. We were so excited because I've talked about Leo 13th for the last 20 years of my career. And so the Dignity Work Institute, let me talk a bit about it, then I'll turn it over to Natalie, who has been really central to understanding and into processing into working for on the Dignity of Work initiative and the communication of it. So over the last few months, we've made it our mission to listen to workers. This is not Sherrod Brown or Joe Donnelly or Natalie Jackson telling workers, here's what we're going to do for you. It's listening to them. We've done a national poll. It's across all groups across 50 states. We didn't ask about Biden, or I'm not in it, or we didn't ask about Biden or Trump. This is about hearing from workers. We asked them about their lives, how they view success, what stands in their way, how they see the current economy, how much and what kind of changes they want to see. And as you'll hear from Natalie, in the research we've done, they're speaking clearly. They speak pretty much in one voice, regardless of gender or race or age or region of the country. There's this inclination for too many people to pit workers against workers, rural workers versus urban workers, black workers against white workers or brown workers, manufacturing versus service workers. And of course, rural workers face unique challenges, as so many people have pointed out in these 3 days, especially with rural healthcare and rural broadband and rural transportation. But you know that better than anybody. But what's striking to us is how similar workers' feelings in the economy are. Workers, almost to the person, say too much money going out the door, not enough coming in. People feel like they can't afford a middle-class life anymore, no matter how hard they work, and they think the only way to success is just work harder, work harder, work harder. They strongly believe corporations rig the system. The system clearly is rigged against them, but they think that politicians join those corporations in rigging it, that the politicians aren't standing up. So they don't see politicians as an answer, even though most of us in this call think that good public policy is an answer. Most of them don't think that. One of the clearest things that jumps out to us from the polls and the focus groups we've done is the way policymakers and politicians measure and talk about the economy. It simply doesn't connect with workers. Biden did it, Trump did it, Obama did it, Bush did it. Talk about GDP, talk about unemployment rate, talk about inflation, talk about the stock market. That doesn't connect. If you're a worker working 2 jobs, you don't really care that the unemployment rate is now under 3%. They think that's not even close to telling the whole story. And talking about Bidenomics or Trump's trumpeting, pardon the verb, this great economy is really alienating to people. That's why they vote for change. They voted for change in 16 from Obama, a Democrat, to Trump. They voted in change of 20, Biden from Trump. They voted for change in 24, Trump over Biden. So when you listen to people, you understand how broken the system is, and it simply isn't captured by statistics. The inflation rate coming down isn't a lot of comfort if everything's still more expensive than it was 5 years ago, when already to them a middle class life style seemed out of reach. People still remember what their favorite brand of peanut butter spaghetti sauce cost 4 or 5 years ago, and obviously companies aren't lowering their prices. They're using the pandemic. They're using the problems of the supply chain is another excuse to raise prices. And workers don't expect outside help. They don't expect much help from government. When Joe talked in the introduction, how 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, workers believed that the Democrats were on their side in taking on corporate interests. They don't see politicians willing to stand up to corporate interests on their behalf. They think they think that workers and politicians and the workers think that together politicians and corporations rig the system to benefit the rich and powerful. It's hard to argue that they don't. For all the talk from supposed economic experts about the complex factors that determine wages and prices, workers have pretty damn good intuition about it. They know corporate greed when they see it. They know it's a big reason why they can't get ahead and their incomes don't keep up with costs. People talk about corporations using any excuse to raise prices. Workers don't bring up government programs as solutions, but they talk about the need for anyone, to rein in corporate greed. People are hungry for a vision of change will actually rein in corporate greed, lower their costs, create an economy where their hard work pays off. And that's where all of you come in on this, that you can represent rural workers. When I say workers, I mean across the board. It's not just factory workers or carpenters or McDonald's. It's McDonald's workers. It's everybody. But what unites rural workers with working people all over the country is that believing the system's rigged, we got to do something about it. And we have to start by listening to them. And that's the most important thing. Go where they are, listen to them. So I'll turn it over to Natalie Jackson with GQR to talk about the research we've done, her central role in it, and what we specifically heard from rural and small town workers. Natalie, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I am going to start sharing this slide deck. I'm going to talk through the results of two projects. One was a survey we conducted in February, national survey, like Senator Brown said, all 50 states. And then we conducted some focus groups in May building on that work and really honing in on the themes that we picked up on in the survey. I do have to say this is some of the most interesting and most important work I have done in my career. This is a fantastic project, and I'm honored to be part of it. I grew up in extreme rural Texas with a working class family, and so it hits home for me very much, both being here at the Rural Progress Summit and doing this type of work. So this is a wonderful opportunity that I've been a part of. I can get my slides working. Here we go. Just a really brief FYI on our methodology. The survey that we did it by telephone. Yes, people do still pick up their phones. It was mostly cell phones. Not very many pick up their phones, but we did get them too. And we did oversamples of Black, Hispanic, and young people to ensure that we could really dig in with those groups as well as the broader population. All survey estimates are subject to margin of error, so just keep that in mind. And then for the focus groups, we did 6. You can see the different groups that we did there. We did young people 18 to 29, white non-college men living in rural or small towns, suburban mothers with children under 26. We all know that just because they turn 18 doesn't mean you're done. So we raised that to 26. Hispanic women under 60, Black men under 60, and white non-college women in the 30 to 49, they're likely to have children, working age group. Many of that group were also rural and small town people. So just a picture of what people are doing for work. Most people are not working office jobs. I'm sure most of us on this webinar know that, but it is still instructive to see the numbers. When we talk about office workers, we're talking about maybe 1 in 5 among the rural and small town group, 1 in 4 among everyone. Just a quick word here, the numbers in parentheses are the rural and small town numbers that we broke out. For the most part, there are not significant differences. We see people share the same struggles across types of areas. But there are some subtle differences, for example, with the type of work they're doing, which makes sense. They're more likely to be in the industry and manual fields, slightly less likely to work in office buildings, that sort of thing. So that kind of sets the stage. A lot of discourse and political discourse tends to focus on return to work or policies that affect office workers, and that's a place where we lose the majority of our population right from the start. So I'm going to show you several sets of clips from the focus groups that we conducted. It's particularly powerful to experience what these people said in their own words in a way that you can't get from surveys. These were really incredible experiences. The participants were very open and honest with us, and we appreciate that greatly. They gave us some great insight into their life, into some very private areas of their life. So this first set is how they responded to initial questions right at the start of the focus groups about how their families are and what they think of the economy right now. And you'll see that right from the start, they were just very open and honest.
Any other quick comments on the economy in general?
It's getting worse.
Can you say a little
Yeah.
more about that,
Yeah,
Julie?
no, I mean, so I love what you said, live in La Vida Broca. Yes, it's so true. So I am not rich enough to have stocks, but I mean, so that whole thing doesn't affect me. I don't have anything in there. But I'm seeing it go down and down and down, and I'm seeing prices go up and up and up. And
Yeah, so for me, I was just recently laid off from my job in March, kind of a direct result from the economy. My income was twice of what my husband's is, so we lost essentially 2/3 of our income. I was lucky enough to get a severance and get unemployment, so we're okay, but it's one of those slippery slopes where it's, one big bill, one car breakdown, it could be very bad. And unfortunately, my husband makes too much where we don't qualify for any sort of assistance, which I think in this economy needs to be reevaluated with what those levels are. So we're okay, but it's one of those, we're nervous type of situation.
I get Social Security disability, and I just pray as hard as I can that that Musk will not strongly advise or try to take away the Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid benefits, because if that would happen to happen, I don't want to think about what could happen without that. I'd lose my my medicine. I don't know how I could afford my apartment with that. Yeah, I'd have to choose between medication and housing, to be honest.
Right. So we heard many more stories like those. Part of why people's income is so precarious, or perhaps a little more precarious than generally gets discussed, is when you look at how people get paid, it's the majority of Americans are getting paid in a contingent way. Only 40% are salary. That drops to about 37% in the rural areas. That's not a big difference. I would say it's basically the same. 45% are paid hourly, and then you have some that are paid by contract, and a few self-employed and some project-based. You see the hourly pay really focused in the industry and manual fields, healthcare, and service workers. And healthcare, I think, is one that gets overlooked as well, because the tendency with healthcare is to think about doctors and large hospital systems. And that's not the bulk of who we're talking about here. These are home healthcare workers. They're relatively low paid in the healthcare field, but still very contingent in how they're paid. We also asked a question on the survey to kind of gauge where people are with emergencies. So thinking about your financial situation, if you expected a sudden, unexpected $1,000 expense, how would you handle it? And we gave them 4 choices. One was not be able to afford it at all, be able to afford it by going into debt or cutting back on necessities, be able to afford it, but it would have an impact on their other spending, or be able to afford it comfortably. And what we see here is about half can afford it comfortably. Nationally, a majority say they would have to either cut back other spending or they wouldn't be able to do it. And this is really striking when you think about what costs $1,000 in our everyday lives. You know, your car needs a repair. Well, that's easily several $100,000. You get into an accident and your insurance runs you around and you need to cover something. Someone gets sick and medical insurance doesn't cover it all. Your pet needs care. There are zillions of things that cost hundreds of dollars up to 1,000 that come up for families. So this is a really strong indicator to me of how precarious people's financial situations are. We talked to people in the groups and the survey about their current work experiences, what they're doing, what their experiences are. We asked a series of questions of, have you done any of these things in the last 2 years? And the big picture here is that we get a lot of churn in the workforce. A quarter have worked more than one job at the same time in the last 2 years. 15% have quit a job to take a higher paying one in the last 2 years. 1 in 10 have changed jobs for location, quit a job due to bad working conditions, or worked a gig job. And we have 7% that lost a job due to layoffs or restructuring. So all of those may seem like relatively small percentages, but they all add up to a workforce that is constantly shifting and adapting to different circumstances. And that adds to financial precariousness, obviously. And when we wanted to dig into this a little bit more in the focus groups, we asked people about the availability of good jobs in their area, kind of driving at what's underneath this churn. Are there good jobs? Do they feel like they see them? And this is a few examples of what they had to say.
Do you think that there are good jobs available in the area where you live?
I'm on a Facebook group called NYC Jobs, and people always post like jobs that they find in the area or open houses. And I see tons of those being posted daily, but I don't see that many people saying that they actually were hired. I see a lot of people saying they went to their interview or even the second interview, even did even if they have to do like a background or anything, but not really getting hired.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm on a lot of like Facebook mom groups that are like local to my community, and something I hear very often is we have these like graduates from these amazing universities like CU Boulder, and it's like impossible for graduates with like 4.0s to find jobs. And from what I'm seeing, the best jobs that a lot of college graduates, masters included, that live here, they're getting nanny jobs, they're getting dog walking jobs, they're getting bartending jobs, but they're not actually getting jobs along with, you know, what they graduated with. So I feel like there's a lot of service out here, and there's a lot of like businesses and also a lot of like big money stuff, firms. But from what I've seen and what I've heard from people who've been here for 30 years, there's like people are leaving essentially. Like they're graduating here, they're going to these amazing colleges, but they can't get hired here because there's not much here except in certain lines of work. So I would say no.
Do you think that there are good jobs that are available in your area? Or not so much?
Not in a little small town I live. That's why I work from home.
Yeah,
All mine's factories pretty much in my area.
the town I live in, there's nothing local that pays good. Like I work from home for a company that's in Detroit.
And then Melanie, you're in the market. Do you feel that there are good jobs available in your area?
So there are, but I think all the layoffs, it's very competitive. Anytime I go on LinkedIn to apply for something, this job was posted 2 hours ago and 300 people applied already. Especially with the world of remote work. I'm not just competing against people in Delaware, I'm now competing against the entire United States.
To what degree do you feel that in the area where you live, there are good paying jobs out there that, and they're available to you?
I think there are, but I think it's very competitive. And where I live in the Massachusetts outside of Boston, it's extremely expensive, the housing market and rents. So there are, but like I said, right now in the current job market, what I'm seeing in the Northeast is there's more candidates than jobs. If that makes sense.
Do you?
So given that we know people often work more than one job, in the survey, we were trying to get a measure of, who holds more than one job and how many people have done this. And when you say how many jobs have you ever held at the same time, we get 60% saying that they've held more than one job at the same time. Now, this includes a wide variety of circumstances, but it is striking that we have 3 in 5 Americans who have ever worked more than one job at a time, and 1 in 5 that have worked 3 or more at the same time. Given that a lot of the additional jobs right now fall under the gig work, and there's a lot of curiosity about gig work and how people handle it, we pulled some clips that came up in the focus groups. These were more organic conversations. Gig work came up quite a bit as an option that people use. And so we wanted to show you how they're talking about it.
I do other things besides that to help me with the inflation, to come along. So
give me an idea of other things that you do. What do you mean?
I mean, I do a little Uber Eats, a little Amazon Flex, other gigs and to make up. So, and then I go to pantries. So I go other places to make life easy for me.
Okay. How about you, Corey? How did you get by?
Just like Brian, they did give me a severance. It lasted not the full year, but it lasted a couple months. I had to rent for a couple months, and then I was able to get unemployment as well for 6 months. And I used all that up. And then at the same time, I've been doing gig work, Uber and Lyft and all that kind of stuff just to top it all off. But ever since the unemployment and severance ran out,
Why do you think somebody might need to work more than one job?
So they can afford groceries. I mean,
Yes,
really
afford to live,
anything.
yeah.
Okay.
One job never doesn't pay enough most of the time.
Okay. Okay.
I think a lot of people are having to take advantage of like the gig work, like DoorDash or Uber or whatever else to just kind of fill in, donating plasma to fill in those.
As a second, in addition to their main job.
Flexible
Yeah.
that they can work with their full time. Yeah.
I know that when my mom was a kid, there was nothing like Instacart or like what are some other places? There was nothing like Instacart. There was not like Uber where you could like have side hustles. Yeah,
DoorDash.
like DoorDash, where you can have side hustles and make money off of that. Like you had to go in person, and do everything. So I think that there's a lot more opportunities to make money, but with that comes like I guess the inflation and like extra bills. So I don't know if it's such a good trade-off, but
Do you
yeah.
think it's worth it though when you have to like gas too, the amount of gas that you eat up in your car?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, especially with like the trade-off of having more expensive stuff. Like, I don't know how much worth it is, but if we're just talking in terms of like more job opportunities and stuff, I would say like there is more out there that you can do that you couldn't do years ago.
I guess other people I know started doing stuff like they thrifted and they sold their vintage clothes online, just as a little side thing. And that still is good for like supplemental income, not a main source, but supplemental income is how we all phrase it. And it just gives us the ability to basically cover a large area of an expense that most people have and need to live, such as food. If that requires 500 to 1,000 in a month, these little side things, they cover that entirely potentially.
I do
We wanted to bring in the discussion of value. Do people feel like they get value out of their work? We know it's a little, we've established it's a little bit precarious financially. Do they feel like their employer values them? And the vast majority of people did say yes. We have about 1 in 5 that said no. We had some that said they don't know. We asked a follow-up question on the survey that was just open-ended and asked people, why? Why do you feel valued or not? And the yes options were very telling. Many of them were about feeling good about the work that they do, feeling like they are being useful, being able to support their family. Very few were actually about their pay. So in the focus groups, we intentionally asked a question about getting paid their value. And you'll hear a very different perspective from what these numbers show in these clips.
So you put a lot of more work in and you're not really paid for that work.
Yeah, I feel like everywhere I go, any job I do, I strive to be the best. You know what I mean? To try to produce as much as I can, in the best way possible to meet their quotas, even exceed them. So with that being the case, I feel like I should get paid for that.
Yeah.
What do you think it is? What do you think are the reasons that you're not getting paid more, excuse me?
I think, to be honest, I've worked other jobs like fast food and like cashier. I think it's just pretty much they can replace you with somebody they can pay cheaper.
Oh, I work at a large company where there's like several 100,000 people and we're just a number.
Right, my computer froze for just a moment. So we're going to transition now to talking about what their views are on what success would look like and what the barriers are to achieving that success. In the survey, we did this really interesting and telling exercise. So let me walk you through it. We told people to imagine a ladder with steps from 0 to 10. 0 is at the bottom. It's the worst possible life. Things are absolutely terrible. 10 is the best possible life you could be living. We asked them, where do you think you are on this ladder now? And that's what's on the left here. This is where they think they are currently. And then we asked a second question of, where do you think you'll be 5 years from now? So, and that's on the right. So you can interpret these numbers and where people place themselves in a lot of ways. We view it as, if you're not 8 or above, there are some things missing in your life, probably. We often see people have a tendency toward optimism. And so it seems like, if things are going really well for you, you'd put yourself in an 8 to 10. So the current levels, only 37% put themselves in this top layer. And by the way, for rural folks, it was basically the same. I have that coming up on the next slide. When you go 5 years from now, you notice a huge increase, almost, comes close to doubling the number of people in that upper category. Now, we did ask people what they think will change that gets them from where point A to point B. If you're increasing, what do you think is changing? And the answers are all about what they're doing for themselves. No one is expecting anyone to come rescue them. They just expect that they are going to work hard. And we have just a few examples of that.
As of right now, I'm a nursing student as well. So I think tenure, within the next 5 years, I think by then everything will be accomplished. I'll have more income coming in. My vehicle, I will no longer have a car payment on. Insurance, obviously, still there. But I just think when it comes to income, that'll be a lot better. And that's part of the issue now.
Got it. Okay. Tyona, go ahead.
Finishing my medical billing and coding certificate, that won't take like 5 years. That'll actually be done in the next few months. So with that being said, I feel like I can get my family in a better environment.
On an upward arc and you continue what you're doing and continue to make good decisions, you can only, you know, expect the future to get better. If you're on a downswing and you continue to make the same decisions, I don't know what kind of improvement you're going to expect. As far as who's in office has never affected my life much day to day, to be honest with you. I can't tell the difference from one administration to the next.
I hope it's us, right? We can't rely on anyone else. We all want to think, oh, if there's a new president or laws passed or so and so, we probably all thought that 5 years ago, right? So I think just us, like, just growing and finding, new ways to maybe earn money or cut back, or if we want to work on our health. I mean, it could be anything. I think we just have, for me personally, I'm just working every day to better myself and my situation.
Okay.
Phase. So I'm taking it into my own hands. I'm trying to find ways to get like certifications to get into better job fields. I believe I'll be able to accomplish that in the next couple years. That way I can get into a more lucrative job, and that way my family can get out of that maintenance phase and begin to flourish. That's why I believe in the next 5 years I'll definitely be in that phase.
Now, you heard a couple of people mention the administration or who is president. We did not prime people politically in any part of these focus groups. In fact, we had a couple of participants at the end of different groups actually remark that they appreciated the conversation and that it wasn't political. There were a few things that came up here and there like this, but I did want you to know that those remarks were generated from them. We did not prime them to think about politics with this particular issue.
As of right now,
if we look at different groups and how they move on the ladder, we do see some differences. People at more precarious stages of life expect that their lives are going to improve. They start lower and they end up, on par with everyone else. People under 50 start at an average of 6.1 as opposed to 6.7 for everyone. But then they move up to 7.9 compared to 7.8, the average for everyone. So, we do see differences, young people, people of color, people who are paid hourly, people working more than one job. They start out lower, but they expect to make up the difference in the next 5 years. Rural and small town people are among those who don't shift very much. Some of that is because this is an older population relative to everyone else. But notice that they start higher and then don't move as much. So it really kind of along the same averages, just less movement up the scale. We wanted to know what people view as essential to financial success. On this slide, we're back to the format where the national numbers are the first ones and the rural small town numbers are in parentheses. It's astonishingly simple. We have 85% of people saying it's essential to be able to pay your bills on time each month, have a steady and solid income. Then everything else starts getting lower and lower and lower. One thing we found interesting, given common narratives around home ownership, is that only 55% said owning their own home is essential to being financially successful. It's a little bit higher among the rural and small town population. We say that a little bit lower among the urban population, which makes sense because of cost of living and different narratives around renting and that sort of thing. Interestingly, living on one income or job, only 44% say that's an essential piece. People are willing to do what it takes to be financially successful. They're working really hard. They expect to work really hard. They don't expect anyone to come get them, but it's difficult to do that. And they have very simple needs. we have a set of clips where we followed up with what financial success looks like to them with a question of, okay, what does it look like if you don't feel financially successful? The vast majority of our focus group participants said they do not feel financially secure. So this is them talking about some of the trade-offs they're making because of that.
Give me an idea of those trade-offs that you've had to make. Jirakira, you were nodding your head.
Yeah, especially last summer, with the heat and the air conditioner, the electricity came so high that it's like, okay, the budget that I have for the next, I think like 2 weeks of groceries, now the electricity is going, I'm gonna have to pay the electricity with that money, and it's like, which do I do? We need both. Both are important, and that's not the first time.
I have a chronic illness, so that, you know, that alone, like Medicaid is my saving grace, and I have to like kind of live in a way that's like I can't lose my Medicaid, so I can only stay within a certain income, which is hard.
Okay.
But I'm a type 1 diabetic, so if I get out of Medicaid, I'm looking at $2,000 a month. So there's like no bridge between like entrepreneurship, you know, making that money and then being able to afford. And I, you know, I think medical is just so expensive for everyone.
Yeah, I don't really have enough. I work out outside now. Like I go to a park. Like I stop. Like I used to work out at LA Fitness, and I don't even have enough to keep up with the payments every month. So I just work out at my local park. You know.
I had to pick between my diabetes medication or food. I couldn't go out and just have any fun. Like I couldn't
Yeah.
I couldn't drive my car to a friend's house because I couldn't afford the gas that it would take to go hang out with somebody. I had to sit at home and do nothing. Basically have absolutely no life and no fun and nothing because I had to pick and choose between where I could spend what little bit of money I had, and it always ended up going to bills or medication.
All of this adds up. You know, they're not talking about vacations. Oh, I can't take time off. I can't go to Disney. These are like real things. And in some other clips, we had to, you know, pick and choose because of time. But it becomes clear that a large part of what goes away when people are not financially successful is a sense of themselves. They don't, like the last gentleman said, you don't have the ability to do anything except work and go home and take care of your family. And there's a real sense of identity loss in that came through these groups. All of that combines to make people really willing to overhaul the whole system. We asked people on a scale from 0 to 10, where 0 means nothing needs to change and 10 means the entire system needs to change. How do you think the economy needs to change to help people like you get ahead? 30% said 10, throw out the whole system. 50% said 8 to 10. The mean was 7.3. Among rural and small town residents, you have very similar numbers. Slightly higher, 33%, 10, 52%, 8 to 10, mean of 7.5. So people are angry. They want change. We asked in the focus groups at the end, we asked them to type in the chat box what needs to change about the economy for you to get ahead. And these are a few of their responses. I'm running short on time, so I'm going to actually go to where they're talking about who's to blame for this. They think there need to be drastic changes, and this is them talking about who they think is to blame and how they think they're being ripped off.
The people that are sitting in the executive chairs are just raising, being greedy, needing more money for whatever reason. And we're the ones down here at the bottom that's having to suffer for them to drive Benz and Mercedes and live the lavish life, $1 million homes.
corporations get greedy. They see salaries going up for people and they want more and more of your money. So they have to figure out more and more ways to try to take more and more of your money.
And they know people are going to be able, they know people need to survive off of certain things. So these people are going to pay for it no matter how high it gets. And them companies know they can continue to raise prices because people need this stuff and they're going to have to pay it regardless of if they're living in a 1-bedroom shack or living in a mansion. You're still going to have to pay for it because you need it. So companies are going to steadily gouge you.
All of them have like their lobbies. Like each sector has their hands in somebody has their hands in somebody's pocket. So that's why I feel like a lot of change doesn't get done, because it could be even a surge of, okay, I'm going to have to do this, but then as soon as they get to the level that it can actually affect change, that's when the big money come in and say, hey, if you leave that alone, I'll give you this towards your campaign, or I'll just slide this in your pocket. And I mean, human nature, we're going to be all swayed by our personal interests.
Right. And just a bit of explanation, that table that you saw in one of the clips was information that we shared with the participants and asked them to react to. And we asked them, what do they think the causes are of increased prices? And so that was some of the response we were getting to that particular question. So just a quick review. We've already said most of this. The situation for people is dire. They're angry. It's at a boiling point. They can't make ends meet. They're struggling. And these are really diverse groups, and they say a lot of the same things. People are working a lot. They're worn out. They're tired. They take on gig work. They view it moderately positively. It's an opportunity. They would rather have a job that, covers what they need to live, but they appreciate the opportunity to take on gig work to supplement. They want to improve. They're willing to work to improve. And mostly they blame corporations and politicians, and not really any particular stripe. We had people of all partisanship in the focus groups, and there was not a lot of blame to any one party or person. Trump and tariffs came up, but it was limited. Generally it was all corporations, all politicians. So I will stop there so that we have some time left.
Well, thank you so very, very much for all of that information, Natalie. It's incredibly valuable. And this would be to Sherrod and to Natalie. You think about the election in 24, and you look at Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, the manufacturing belt, the farm belt, and you lose each state by a point or two, and it completely changes the destiny of the country. And, I know others were doing the same thing. I was knocking on doors in Michigan and in Pennsylvania. And the message of the Democratic Party just didn't seem to connect to the working families that are out there where they're struggling. They were saying, look, the message I see from your folks is not relating to the fact that what's important to me is I have to be able to have my car keep running for the rest of the week. And I have to be able to make sure my kids can get decent health care. It was almost as if we assumed they would understand. Sherrod, did you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. One of the things that struck me, and your comments are just right there. One of the things that struck me is how urban and rural, and just urban areas, metro areas, rural voters have most things in common. I mean, what struck me, these focus groups, no matter how you sliced it, whether it was by race, by gender, by geography, by part of the country, somewhat by income, but by and large, if they're making family income less than about 120,000 a year, that they all said the same things. They think that if they don't see politics as left or right, that's just not a calculation. They see who's on their side. And I go back, and Joe, you were an acute student of this. When Biden talked about Bidenomics, or Trump talks about best economy ever now under him, they just, it doesn't mean anything to them.
No.
They just don't hear it. They just, because they look at their own lives, and that you've been saying, Natalie, more's going out than coming in. Somebody has that $1,000 expense. If they gotta get new tires, that's the whole $1,000. It really is, nobody's on their side, and we've got to have a message, whether you live in rural Lima, small town Lima, rural Montpelier, Ohio, whether you live in Cleveland or Indianapolis or greater Chicago, the challenges are really the same. And we've got to talk to people and show we're on their side. And I don't think they think Republicans are on their side particularly either. But we've got to show we are, because as Joe said, we were the party of workers from the 30s into whatever the last, whatever. And I still hear, Joe, and I know you and I joined forces on this a lot of times, these trade agreements, you weren't in the Senate then or in the House then either, but when NAFTA came up, I still hear people talking about NAFTA, that workers lost their jobs first to the South and when they moved from Cleveland or Gary, Indiana to the South, and then they lost these jobs overseas, and nobody seems to be fighting it. So we've got to be the party that stands up for workers, that listens to them. And I wish every one of my colleagues, I know that Natalie and Al did a presentation to a number of senators at Tina Smith's request, and they were really taken by these stories, because everybody's story is the same. No matter which one you put up there, no matter what they look like, they were basically corporations have screwed us and government's in bed with corporations. I mean, we've got to show we aren't. And we've done it on prescription drugs, finally, as you know. We've got to do it over and over again.
What has struck me too is the actual pie of revenue and money and funds and everything. The overall pie is probably bigger. It's just that so much of it has been taken by such a small group. And so what's left for everybody else gets thinner and thinner and thinner.
And that's why in part we talk about the billionaires. I mean, it's clear not everybody used the term rigged, but it's clear they think the system's rigged. They know CEOs are making more and more money. They know profits are up. They know they're working. I mean, look how hard. I mean, there are people talking about themselves, of course, but how hard they're working. The only way to get ahead is to work even harder, not get to spend more time with your family.
I know if you heard one after another, it was, I just need to work harder.
I need to work harder. That's right. And they know the system's rigged because they are working harder. They're more productive. I mean, you can prove the workforce quantitatively, you can prove the workforce is more productive than ever before, and they ain't seeing any, they can't get ahead. And that's the definition of rigged. And Joe's example is exactly that the money's is gravitating, is moving towards the top. And this last Trump bill is gonna show it even more. But we've got to run in 26, whoever's on the ballot, they've got to run against the billionaires, and they've got to run against more money gravitating to the top. And they're getting screwed, but they also have to show empathy, and that we're going to stand with you as workers, whether you're a steel worker or a carpenter union, or whether you're working construction or you're working at McDonald's or working at a 7-Eleven and making not much above minimum wage.
And you know what else? It seems like being Catholic, I probably have an extra special dose of it, but the guilt and the shame. I watched that whole wedding in Venice, Italy, and it took my breath away that it didn't seem to even dawn on any of the people there. People are watching. How can you act like this? In Michigan and Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, like I said, the whole country, folks are like, how can I make sure that there's food for my 8-year-old? And at the same time, they seem to like, it seems to be they enjoy showing this incredible conduct.
Yeah,
it is something that if I had done, my dad would have. I'll never forget. I went fishing with him on a party boat one time. It was with a bunch of the workers that he worked with, and I actually caught the biggest fish. And I said, "Oh, Dad, I'm gonna make like $40." And he goes, "You're making nothing. That goes to the people on this boat who work. You contribute to the pot, but there's no chance of you winning that pot. Because
Joe Donnelly has felt Catholic guilt about this in the 40 years since that happened, or 50 years, or whatever it was.
Yeah. You know, Sharon and Natalie, you look at this bill that just passed. They knew it was wrong, but they did it anyhow.
Sure they did. Yep. Sure.
Yeah, and we you noticed particularly the woman talking about she has to really watch her income so that she can stay on Medicaid because she can't afford her insulin without it. But then there's no in between. She's either on it or she's off. So she has to make sure her income stays low enough that she can stay on it. Presumably she does not have a job that provides health benefits. And so, you know, these are real considerations. There were several people that discussed Medicaid having to make decisions between affording their medication and paying their bills. You know, it's all, you know, these are visceral fears for people. And yeah, signing a bill that cuts that is bad.
These were all done before the passage of that bill, before
Yes.
that bill even got attention. And I'm guessing that you know, the people on these screens, most of them don't spend a lot of time watching what people in Washington are doing. I mean, that's part of the issue. But you can bet that all those people, as they start hearing about Medicaid, are going to worry for the next 12 months if they're going to lose it, or the next 18 months when it really starts taking effect. But they're also, and especially the rural audience here, they're also going to see rural hospitals close. And what we didn't even get to is a number that and Joe, this has got to be true in Indiana, it's true in Ohio. We have 88 counties. I'll bet you the local hospital is the largest employer in 70 of them. The largest one or two or three employers for sure. I mean, 30 years ago, it would have been 2 or 3 manufacturing plants, you know, in Van Wert, Ohio, and the Indiana border, or other counties. Now it's the hospital. And there are going to be, my wife's mother was a home care worker and made no money essentially. When she died, I'm particularly proud of this. I didn't know her, Connie, and I have only been married 20 years, but when she died, 700 people showed up at the funeral home because she had that kind of impact on families as a home care worker. And those are really important jobs, paid like nothing. I mean, she made maybe $1 or $2 over the minimum wage and had such an impact on these families. And so many of these healthcare workers do. It's not just the doctors, of course, it's so much more than that.
You talk about a testimony to a life well lived.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah.
That is exactly what that is. And you mentioned about medical care. We have 92 counties in Indiana. Over a third of them have no OB/GYN services. You have to go somewhere else. I was talking to a doctor yesterday in South Dakota who said what you have to do in those areas is if you are expecting, you know, instead of when the time comes, you have to get an appointment because you might be 2 hours away from a doctor when the moment comes. So otherwise you have to go in, you have to schedule, and that has caused a significant increase or reason for more C-sections than others because you schedule a time. And if you are not there for that time, if you're somewhere else, you may not have any medical care. It's astounding.
What does that say about healthcare in our government, in our country, that people have to schedule C-sections because they can't play out it's just two men talking. I'm a little hesitant here, Natalie. Natalie and I talking about this, but I mean, what does it say about the country, the state of women's health when we talk that way?
Well, and just to jump in here, women's health is a huge thing. Children's health is. When I was a kid living in the middle of nowhere, there was like one good doctor in town. The nearest hospital was like 45-minute drive down the road. So we went to College Station. We lived like an hour and a half, a little over an hour from there. And we went to the pediatrician there because there were no pediatricians in the town. So, you know, you talk about being able to afford gas. Well, can you afford gas to go get healthcare? In both situations, women and children, both.
Well, to both of you, we're incredibly grateful for your service, for your time with us today. Sherrod, I look forward to seeing you soon. I hope I am going to tell everybody at the laborers picnic that you said hello,
Right.
that you were the one that forced me to drink a beer at the picnic. So
It was a hard chore to get you to do it. A steep challenge. Thank you, Joe, and Natalie, thanks, and good to see you again. Thanks for everybody, what you're doing to bring Democrats back in rural America.
thanks so much, everybody. Thanks again.